Ridge's father, Eric Forrester, had been relentless. His words resonated sharply in her mind. "Taylor, you're not right for him. You have never been right for him." His voice, normally warm with parental care, had grown frigid, each phrase a knife to her resolve. Eric had always been a towering presence in the family, and his words carried the weight of Forrester Creations' reputation. Taylor had tried to stand firm, claiming that her love for Ridge was sufficient, and that their history, decades of shared moments, children and promises, could withstand any storm. However, Eric's condemnation was more than simply personal. It was a verdict, a final judgment from which she could not escape. She'd stood in the big living room of the Forrester estate, where she and Ridge had danced under chandeliers at many galas, whispering visions of eternity. Eric had paced in front of the hearth, his hands clenched behind his back, his face engraved with a determination that allowed no space for compromise. "Ridge needs stability," he had stated. "He needs someone who will not drag him into unending turmoil. Taylor, you bring pandemonium. You always have." The remarks hurt, not because they were completely true, but because they preyed on her darkest fears. She'd spent years repairing herself after each heartbreak, whenever Ridge returned to Brooke, his other great love. She'd strive to be the woman he could trust, the one who could finally anchor him. But Eric's remarks peeled it away, leaving her raw and vulnerable. Taylor had looked to Ridge for a defense, a spark of the fire that had always existed between them. But Ridge remained mute, his mouth hard and his gaze fixated on the floor. The quiet was terrible than any debate. It was a betrayal based on cowardice rather than infidelity. He wouldn't battle for her, not against his father, nor against the prestige of the Forrester surname. Taylor felt the ground under her shift at that exact moment. The guy she had loved for so long, the man she had forgiven repeatedly, had failed her when she needed him the most. She went out of the mansion without saying anything, the engagement ring still on her finger, the weight intolerable. By the time she got to her car, the tears had begun, hot and persistent, distorting the scene around her. She drove aimlessly through Los Angeles' streets, which were a tangle of recollections. Every nook held a ghost: dinners at Café Russe, walks on the beach, and stolen kisses in the design studio. She and Ridge had created a fragile but real existence here, and it was now disintegrating under the weight of a single conversation. The decision to leave was made in the midst of grief, rather than in a moment of clarity. She couldn't live in a community where every street sign, palm tree, and view of the Pacific reminded her of what she had lost. She required distance, a location where the air did not carry the aroma of Ridge's cologne or the sound of Eric's disapproval. She packed only one bag, leaving behind the outfits she wore to Forrester gatherings, the jewels Ridge had given her, and photographs of their children. She kept only the necessities, as if discarding the weight of her history would somehow alleviate the pain in her chest. The airport was a swirl of fluorescent lights and frantic footsteps. Taylor stood at the gate, her boarding permit crumpled in her hand, gazing at the jet that would transport her to Paris. She chose the city on a whim, recalling how she had sought peace there after previous heartbreak. Paris was far enough away to feel like an escape, yet close enough to her children's life to prevent her from feeling completely alone. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving, neither her daughter Steffi, son Thomas, or even her best friend. The stillness served as a buffer against queries she couldn't answer. On the plane, she sat near the window and watched the lights of Los Angeles fade into the distance. The city shone like an unmet promise, a constellation of possibilities. She buried her forehead against the cool glass, allowing the sound of the motors to drown out her thoughts. But the memories pursued her relentlessly. She remembered the first time she saw Ridge, his easy smile, and how his eyes seemed to look right through her. She recalled their wedding vows, spoken years ago in a different life when they believed love could conquer all. She thought of their children, Steffi and Thomas, who had lived up in the shadow of their parents' tumultuous relationship. Would they understand why she needed to leave? Or will they see it as desertion? Another rift in an already difficult family? Paris welcomed her with rain, a soothing drizzle that resembled the tears she'd stopped pouring halfway across the Atlantic. She found a small flat in the Marais, an area with cobblestone pathways and ivy-covered buildings that felt far apart from Los Angeles's slick modernism. The flat was basic, with creaking floorboards and a little balcony facing a courtyard. It looked nothing like the Forrester estate, but that was the point. She desired simplicity, a space where she could peel back the layers of expectation and recreate herself from the ground up. Days turned into weeks, each one a silent struggle against the loneliness that threatened to consume her. She wandered around the city aimlessly, her scarf drawn tight against the October chill. She walked around museums, lingered in cafes, and sat by the Seine, watching couples go hand in hand. Everywhere she looked there was evidence of love, new love, ancient love, and love that remained. It was a bitter irony to be surrounded by romance in a city that seemed so empty without Ridge. She penned letters that she never sent, long rambling confessions to her children, Ridge, and even Eric. She poured her heart out into the pages, attempting to make sense of the anguish, but the words were empty and inadequate in comparison to the depth of her loss. One evening, she was sitting in a dimly lit restaurant when a stranger approached her table. He was older, with sympathetic eyes and a gentle accent, a literature professor who had observed her reading a battered copy of Madame Bovary. They talked for hours about literature, life, and how sadness can leave a need inside you that nothing else can replace. He didn't know her story, Ridge, the Forresters, or the cancelled wedding. To him she was simply Taylor, a woman with a modest smile and a grief she couldn't conceal. For the first time in weeks she felt notice for herself, not as a fiancée, mother, or therapist. The professor became a friend, someone with whom I could enjoy coffee on gloomy mornings, or debate poetry over glasses of wine. He never pushed her to reveal more than she was willing to share, and she appreciated that. However, his benevolence could not heal the vacuum left by Ridge. She missed him in ways she couldn't express, in the simple moments, his laugh, the way he'd brush her hair away from her face, the peaceful mornings when they'd sit together in silence, satisfied simply to be. She wondered if he missed her as well, or if he'd already moved on to Brooke or someone else like he always did. Back in Los Angeles, the Forresters continued on without her. Steffi poured herself into work at Forrester Creations, her intense drive masking the pain she felt at her mother's absence. Thomas, the most introspective of the two, felt guilty, wondering whether he might have done more to heal the divide between his parents. Eric, meanwhile, held firm in his choice, sure that he had saved his kid from a lifetime of sorrow. Ridge, however, was different. He walked through the days like a troubled man, his sketches on the design table lacking their customary zeal. He didn't talk about Taylor or mention her name, but her absence cast a shadow over everything he did. Taylor learned snippets about their life from common friends, and the occasional email from Steffi that avoided discussing Ridge. Brooke had re-entered the picture, as she always did, taking Taylor's place. It was unsurprising, yet it stung nonetheless. She'd spent so much of her life competing with Brooke, comparing herself to a woman who appeared to have an unbreakable grasp on Ridge's heart. Now in Paris, she recognized that the competition had never been about Brooke, but more about her own drive to establish her worth. And she hadn't been, not to Eric, Ridge, or herself. Winter arrived, and with it, a peaceful acceptance. Taylor started to discover minor joys in her new life. She enrolled in an art class, sketching pictures of Parisian life with a pencil that seemed strange but liberating. She volunteered at a local charity, assisting women in rebuilding their lives after experiencing personal loss. She began writing again, this time stories about women who endured grief and found strength in unexpected places. The act of writing, of putting words on paper, became a lifeline, a method for her to recapture the parts of herself that had been gone. But the sadness never really left her. It lingered in the silence between her breaths. She didn't think of Ridge very often, but when she did, it was with a tender and deep longing. She worried if she'd ever return to Los Angeles and face the Forresters again. Part of her wanted to stand in front of Eric and prove she was more than the turmoil he accused her of causing. But another part of her, the one that was growing to love herself again, realized that returning would entail reopening scars that had only recently begun to heal. One spring morning while cherry blossoms bloomed along the Seine, Taylor got a letter from Steffi. It was brief, written in her daughter's rushed scrawl, but it was heavy, making Taylor's heart throb. "Dad's not the same without you," Steffi wrote. "I understand you had to leave, but I wish you would come back. We miss you." Enclosed was a snapshot of Steffi and Thomas beaming at a Forrester function, their eyes bright but tainted with something unspoken. Taylor held the photograph for a long time, tracing their faces with her finger. She considered calling them and reserving a flight home, but something held her back. She wasn't ready yet. Instead, she strolled to the river, tucking the snapshot inside her coat pocket. The river was tranquil and reflected the delicate pink petals that floated on the surface. She stood there for a long time, allowing the breeze to take away the last of her tears. She had no idea what the future held, if she'd ever return to Ridge or the life she'd left behind. But for the first time in months she felt a glimmer of optimism, a sensation that perhaps just maybe she could start a new life here, one that was entirely her own. Taylor remained in Paris, a lady adrift but not lost, bearing her melancholy like a gentle companion. The city embraced her with its ancient stones and limitless stories, and she accepted it one day at a time, finding comfort in the simple act of being. She was no longer Taylor Hayes, Rich Forrester's fiancée or Eric Forrester's disappointment. She was simply Taylor, and that was enough for now.